What is up, everybody? Brian Mendler back in your life on this Monday, January 27th, 2020. And I am super excited today to be joined by this has become one of my favorite books. Now, I have to tell you, I haven't gotten through the whole thing because I just got it, but I've read about half of it. Kids these days. And I love the title. What a great title. Jody Carrington joining me from freezing cold Alberta, Canada, correct?
Come on, Brian Medler. What is even happening here? I would get up at 6:30 in an igloo for you because you are such a game changer. So I am so excited to be here this morning.
I'm excited to have you too, and I was reading your book the other day. I had taken my kids to dance. So both my kids do dance, right? 8 and 6 years old. And they went into class and I started reading your book. I was sitting on the couch at about an hour and a half, and the story of the girls who are sitting on the tractor, right? And tell that story real quick. Unbelievable story. Can you want to tell that story? You want me to tell that story?
Yeah, I can tell that story.
Tell
I
that
can tell that
story.
story. So I've been inspired by educators and kids my whole life. And these three baby girls, so we live in a rural farming community up here in Canada. And I started to consult with the school division that these babes were associated with, and it was harvest. And so, oftentimes, as kids do during harvest, they were out with their dad. This particular family had have 4 kids, and the babes were sitting around the end of the corner of a grain truck, which we often do, watching the grain sort of come into the back of a truck. And one of the babes fell in, and her sister went in after her. And canola grain is really kind of tiny, and so when you inhale it, it gets really difficult to breathe, obviously. And all 3 sisters ended up in the bin, and they passed away, 2 at the scene, and one baby girl was flown and died on the way to the hospital. And so there was, in our small communities, as you know, our educators become the holders of hard things. And that whole community, went to the school. The first responders were educators. When the kids came to school the next day, just sort of walking that whole community home, it just made me realize so much that our teachers, our educators, are so critical in any community, and we're not doing nearly enough to hang on to them.
What were you doing at the time? So what was your job, and what was your what was your role during that thing when that happened?
So we had just moved back here, and I'd worked 10 years at a locked inpatient unit at our local children's hospital, a locked psychiatric unit. And so I have a whole history of kids and trauma, and I don't really even like kids. I'm a child psychologist. I'm not a huge fan of kids. Um, it's kind of weird. What I love most is the people who hold them. And babies have taught me so much about what we need to do and how we need to be better. And so after we had our kids, our twins, we moved back to where my husband grew up. And so I was just doing a private practice consulting, and I would consult with school divisions in our local area around the tough kids. And this particular school division I had worked with a number of times and was so impressed with how they banded together in a community, and really the resources were the teachers. And so when this tragic accident happened, it occurred to me that we don't have nearly enough in place to support people who do this holy work of education. And it has very little to do with literacy and numeracy, very little. Some of the biggest lessons in this whole world of education happen in how we're walking each other home. Ram Dass said this: we are all just here walking each other home. And I can't think of people more critical, especially as our babies sort of get in more and more into the school system. Educators are so prime in walking our babies home.
Yeah, and just the amount of toll that an incident takes. And we talk about trauma in schools all the time. And one of the things that I say is, as an educator, it's critical to know that there's a story. Like, you don't always have to know exactly what the story is, but almost always there is a story that accompanies that kid. And if you can take the mindset of feeling sad for versus getting mad at, right? Like, when I get personally, for myself in my life, when I get mad at people, I react and I respond very differently than when I feel sad for someone. When I get mad at someone, I often want to react and fight back and argue. When I feel sad for, I take the opposite approach. I back off, I tiptoe around, I look at things from different perspectives. I jump back in, but then I go back out. I'm a lot more cautious. And I know for me as a teacher, especially when I taught special ed, self-contained, I always felt like if I could get myself into that mode of feeling sad for it, and again, that doesn't mean like I pity kids or anything like that, but it's about my own mindset, my own mind frame, and understanding that something like that could have happened in a person's life, and a person's life can change instantaneously. We had this happen in our community the day before Thanksgiving. I talk about I don't know if you have a favorite day of the year. So I have a favorite day of the year. My favorite day of the year is always the day before Thanksgiving. I love that day because it's where I live. I live in Rochester, New York, and it's usually like the weather's good. It's changing. You have that 4 days off. You're heading into the Christmas season. I just like that day in general. And we had a tragedy in our community. There was literally not even a mile from my house, there was a babysitter walking with three kids she was watching, and a woman fell asleep at the wheel, and she lost control, and she swerved over the road, and they were on the sidewalk, and she plowed into them, and she killed the babysitter and the 9-year-old girl and the 2.5-year-old. So there were three kids, a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 2.5-year-old. The 9-year-old was killed. The 7-year-old was like lollygagging behind. I don't know if you ever gone for a walk with your kids and one of them's kind of like walking way behind. You're almost annoyed them. You're like, come on, catch up. That's what happened. Luckily, I ended up saving that child's life by being behind, and the 2.5-year-old in critical condition in the hospital. I mean, and it just shakes the foundation to the core. And I think sometimes it's easy as a teacher and educator to forget that these are instances and things that have really happened in people's lives. You get what I'm saying?
You know what? There's so many things in that story, Brian, that just is so critically important to the work that you do and that I do, because I think what we fail to understand is two things. In order to have empathy for other people's story, which is really what you're talking about, how do I step into somebody else's shoes, right? And the kids who need it the most are the hardest to give it to. Right? The kids who need it the most are the hardest to give it to. And I'm only able to have empathy if I'm okay, if I'm solid, if I am feeling filled up and supported. Then empathy becomes so much easier. If I feel beaten down and disrespected, or not supported by my staff, my community of teachers, I'm going to have so much more of a difficult time being empathic. Right? And our biggest way home through all this process is to have empathy for the people who step into our lives. And I love what you say about this process, because it is so true. One of the biggest quotes that have come out of kids these days, which blows me away, is consider every time you call a kid attention seeking, change that to connection seeking.
Yeah.
And see how you show up. Because kids will ask for what they need in the most inappropriate ways, and they can only give away what they've received. If nobody has been kind or empathic towards them, you're not born with kindness. You're not born with empathy. You are not born with the capacity to repair and apologize. Somebody has to show you how to do that. They can't tell you. I can't tell you, be kind. You apologize. I have to show you, to give you that neuro pathway to be able to do it and give it away.
Yeah.
Make
But
sense?
why do you think it's so hard for so many people to do in the classroom? Like, why? Because and I think a lot of people do it really well, but I think there's definitely, a lot of teachers specifically who struggle with this, who struggle to look in that direction first, right? Frequently, I feel like the direction people look first is punish, like, get them out of here, write them up. It's sort of like going to that store. Like I kind of say in life, there in school, I think of it like two stores, right? So you're going down the road and there's two competing stores. On one side of the road, you have a store that says make a kid's life better. On the other side of the road, there's a store that says consequence, punishment. And like as a teacher, when you're in a moment with a challenging kid, you have a choice to go into one of those two stores, right? And I say when you go into the punishment consequence store, usually you've already failed before you even start looking around. Like you can start looking around and they got stuff in there. They got detention, they got in-school suspension, they got write a kid up, they have takeaway recess. Like those are all choices you can buy. And then on the other side of the street in that store, they've got, get to know the kid better. Spend an extra 2 to 3 minutes a day walking around the halls with a kid, one-on-one, really getting to know them and hearing their story and sharing your story, And I feel like if you go into that store, you win versus going into the one across the street.
Listen, I do not have it. I have never, ever one time met an educator who didn't want to do right by kids. When they started in this business, nobody gets into this. Listen, this is what I respect so much about you educators, because here's what you decided. You were smart people. At some point in your life, you were like, you know what? I feel like I want to look after other people's children. Yeah, I like lice. I like to be told to F
It's not.
off. I mean, like, sign me up. I feel like this is what I want to do every single day, right? You choose this, which is amazing to me. And nobody gets into this business going like, you know what? I am not a fan of children. I am in this business to teach them a lesson. We all want to get into that store where we want to do better by kids and walk kids home and help them through hard things. As a parent, Brian, like, you know this, as a parent, that's what I want for my kids. When I am filled up and I feel connected to them and I feel competent, I can walk my babies home through any trauma, any temper tantrum, any lose your friggin' mind, mom, I hate you, you're the worst person in the planet. I know, baby girl, come here. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When I feel overwhelmed, when the story in my head is I'm failing, when the story in my head is they're going to be a psychopathic serial killer because they are not listening and I haven't taught them, and sweet mother of the Lord, they are drunk Uncle Mark and I shouldn't have married their father. You know, like when those stories start going in my head, I have less capacity to stay calm and connected and to walk them home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you, but I do think some educators went into teaching because they like math, right? Like I think some, I mean, I'm not, again, it doesn't mean that they don't want to do what right by kids or what's best for kids, but I think some people went into teaching because in their mind they're like, I'm teaching social studies all day and I love social studies and social studies is my thing. And and then what happens is in some teachers' classes, the kids get in the way. Right. So all of a sudden, if you're here to teach math or here to teach social studies, and now I disrupt class, I'm in the way. But if you're here to teach me, then math is just in the way. And one of the things I ask teachers sometimes is, do you kick out the kid because they got in the way of your content, or do you kick out the content because it's in the way of the kid? And again, it doesn't have to be one or the other totally, but like us special ed teachers, we kick out content all the time because the truth is we don't really like it anyway. Like I never went into teaching because I was interested in Shakespeare. I went in because, like you said, I was excited when a kid would say, Mr. Mellon, go F yourself. I'd be like, really? Yes, cool. Like, can I get it from there? In my mind, it was like the ultimate competition. Can I get that kid from there to like within a week saying, good morning, Mr. Mellon, how are you? And that was the adrenaline rush that I got when I showed up.
So here's the thing, at the end of the day, regardless of whether you got into teaching because you like math, which I think is a really small percentage of you amazing souls, my biggest push these days is to get back to that why, and to get back to this. We are wired for connection. Every human on this planet is wired for connection. And we are wired to do hard things. You are wired to handle any kid you have in your classroom. If you can sit there and tell me I have, 16 kids, I'm a special ed teacher, 16 of my kids have been in jail, like whatever the deal is, you got the toughest class in all of the creation, I will tell you this, you're wired for it.
Yeah.
I know this to be true. You will handle those so much better when you remember this, you're wired for connection. And the first thing we do when hard things come, when we feel incompetent, when we feel like we're not getting through to a kid, we're failing a kid, administration isn't supporting us, is we disconnect. We shut down. We get into the us versus them. And the only way we're going to survive it is when we stay connected. And never in the history of the free world have we been more disconnected than we are right now.
But so how do I do that specifically? Like if I'm a person and I'm struggling with a kid right now and this kid is pushing my buttons because here's the thing, I think it's easy to say that. And I think a lot of educators go around and they say that, right? They say you have to connect, you have to build relationships, it's critical. And I think it's almost become a cliche because for me, I get it, right? Of course, we're supposed to build relationships, but I think a lot of people don't know how to do it. Like if you came to me right now and you're like, Brian, go build a house, I'd say, I don't know how to build a house. What do I put first? What goes next? What comes after that? But you going to pay me extra to build this house? Oh, you're not. Oh, you're going to give me extra time during the day to build this house? Oh, you're not. Well, wait a minute. Okay, so where, when, how am I supposed to build this house? When, as a teacher, my question is, I got this coming down for me from the state, and I got that coming down for me from my administrator, and that's often what I hear from teachers. It's like I got this going on, and my answer to them, and by the way, is I hear you. And for me, the answer is trust the process. Trust that by connecting with that kid, that's going to lay the foundation for you to be able to teach all of those other things that are coming from the state and your administrator and everywhere else. That's my answer. But it's a tough one for teachers,
Let me tell you, I got one thing. that I hope your people, that I hope your amazing group of people will take away. Your biggest superpower on the planet, you already know it. And this is why I can't believe people pay me to talk about this stuff, because we know it. We know this. Here's your number one superpower. It's called the light up. Your capacity to engage with anybody in your life right now and genuinely, to the best of your capacity, do this.
Yep.
The light up. Do you understand me? It's
Yeah.
like the airport reunion. It's like, what would happen tonight if you went home and your partner walked through the door and you lit up? Well, how would they respond? You come in, you do this.
Right.
Hey, how was your day? Most of the time they're like, you been drinking? What's going, you're only nice to me when you're low. Like, what is it? What happened? What happened? My husband says this to me all the time. What'd you buy? Because the people who need it the most are the hardest to give it to. And the people we love the most are suspicious when we're kind. So
Yeah.
when you think about, you often talk about that kid, right? If you pick that kid tomorrow, I don't want you to do anything. You do not need any more training in literacy, numeracy, your capacity to teach content. Your biggest superpower in any relationship with your children or the child you're trying to reach in your classroom, if you step in tomorrow and do this, hey, good to see you. The ones who need it the most are going to be like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mendler's drunk today. That's what they're going to be saying. What the wrong was, what? Huh?
Right.
And so when we get down to it, it is easy as it is simple. I cannot light up for somebody when I'm exhausted. I cannot when I'm overwhelmed. I cannot when I question whether this teaching profession has my back. I cannot do those things when I am frightened every single day that there's school shooters everywhere. I cannot do those things. And so the kids are the least of our problem. Brian, I say this all the time. The kids are the least of our problem. The people who hold them are who need our support. We don't have any plans for how teachers walk kids through grief. We have very few plans, very few awesome plans to teach teachers or educators how to walk kids home through trauma. And unless we have those in place, unless we start to look after and remind you how friggin' amazing you are on every single day, you have the capacity to change the trajectory of a life
So
by a light up.
So what is it? So walk me through. So if I'm the person and I have a kid who comes in and I know they have trauma and I don't maybe necessarily know what it is, what do I do first if I'm not sure what to do? Like if in my mind I just got out of teacher school and I learned everything's great in a classroom and everybody does, there's everything's fine and treat them all the same way and and now all of a sudden you have this. Where do I start as a teacher?
I'm going to simplify. This is so incredibly simple. Like I'm going to simplify it, and it does not this simple in
Do
the
it.
classroom. I got it. For me,
Simplify it.
There's two kinds of kids. There's a Caillou and a Flat Stanley. Okay, do you understand? Have you ever seen the cartoon Caillou? Okay,
No.
Caillou is the life-sucking whiny kid. That man, I can't, and every time you step into your classroom, they're like, Mr. M, hey, can you, right? Or they're the teenage girl that is always like trying to suck the life out of you. If you've had a Caillou in your classroom, you know they're never sick. Okay, even on a snow day, they're riding their bike. They are there always. If you've ever tried to avoid a kid, right? If you're trying to like get to the staff room, that's a Caillou. If you've ever said this to a kid, you're in my bubble. Where's your space? Where's mine? You know, the life suckers. Okay. And the opposite end of the world, there is the Flat Stanleys. Hoodie up, hair down, maybe ready to like either they're mean or they're super quiet and shy. Okay.
Yep.
Both of those kids have the exact same needs. How I meet them comes to me. The Caillou kid needs my light up over the top crazy. Okay. Good morning. And we don't. We don't want to hang into those kids because they suck the life out of us. We try to avoid them. We let sleeping dogs lie. If they're not in our face, we're like, thank you, sweet Lord. This is going to be a good day because I've avoided this kid. These are the kind of kids I want you to beat to the punch. I want you to stand by their locker. I want you to be sitting in their desk. What would happen if your Caillou came into classroom in the morning and you're like in their desk? I was waiting for you. Woo! Right? They don't know what the heck to do with that. Now, Flat Stanley's opposite. If they come into the classroom and you're like, whoa, good morning, Stan. Whoa, you're sitting in your desk, you make a big deal out of it. How are they going to respond?
Yeah. Right. Not good.
No, they're gonna skip your class. They're
Right. They're gonna
embarrassed.
look right at you like, what the F is wrong with you? You all right? Like, what
Exactly. And
you
they don't
got
trust
problems, lady.
They don't trust it. People don't respond to them that way, so obviously you're a liar. And they're right. They are my low and go slow kids. They need it just as much as Caillou, but I do this. Hey, what's up? I might put a note on their desk so nobody else sees it. Glad you're here. Huh? So I have two kinds of kids. All the kids, you, me, every staff member in any school right now needs to know they matter. If you want the best out of them, you light up. Staff in particular, you bring them meat trays, you feed them, you do whatever. We need a budget for meat trays, dude, like high quality meat
Pizza,
trays.
pizza, pizza, pizza,
Pizza. And not
pizza.
cheap stuff. I'm
Good pizza.
talking, you need good stuff to
Yeah,
remind these
let's
kids.
how about we just make a rule that we don't ever go with cheap stuff. Whatever it is, it should not be cheap. Like if you're gonna do it for teachers, do it right because they deserve it. So if you're gonna bring in donuts, bring in good donuts. Like don't skimp on the donuts. Like bring in the good ones, the
Not the
big fat
Dales,
ones,
man, not the
and give
Dales.
us choices. Give us choices, right?
Exactly. And the same happens for kids, right? And when I figure out how to show up for kids, and again, it's way simpler than this, obviously, but I think about kids in two ways. And how I show up, it always comes down to the light up. It's how I do the light up that matters. That's your most significant, simple superpower.
And what's interesting about what you just said is it's exactly the same as a teacher when I'm trying to teach a kid how to get along with a teacher, right? So there are times as a teacher where kids would come to me and they would complain about other teachers, right? I hate this lady or I hate that lady. And I would say, but you have the ability to get her to love you. And it's on you to do that. Like, and I'll say to the kid, look, she should bend and budge a little bit too, but she's not, and you don't control her. You do not control that woman. And I've said to kids, that woman's failed hundreds of kids before you. She will fail hundreds of kids after you. She doesn't care. Play the game. And what is the game? It's exactly what you just said. For kids, it would literally be, I would say to them, listen, when you walk in, you walk up to that lady, you look her directly in the eyes and you say two words and two words only. And then you know what the two words are? Good morning. And you smile and you sit down in that chair and you do not talk the rest of class. What if she calls on me, Mr. Mellor? She won't. Well, what if she does? She probably won't. But if she does, you can respond. But listen, during class, she's going to look at you. And when she looks at you, occasionally, when she makes quick eye contact, you want to see that eye contact and look her directly in the eyes and go just like this. You don't need to know what she's talking about. Like, let's be clear. But we love the people we love the people who go like that because it makes us feel good about ourselves. And when you can get a kid like that, what's cool about what you said is it's a strategy for teachers, for adults, but it's also a strategy for adults to teach kids to learn how to do in other aspects of their life, which I love.
I agree. And I think my primary focus, though, always is to never put that on the kid. Like, if I can help it, if I see one of my staff that is not serving kids well, and I know that, I can't tell her how to do it. I got to show her. She's the one that I'm going to bring a latte to. She's the one that I'm going to, as a staff, say to her, you know what? This is what I love about you. Right? The hardest one. If you think about, if you're listening today and there's somebody on your staff that you want to throat punch, these are the ones that need the latte. These are the ones that need to be reminded that there's something about the work that they do is holy. Because
Yeah.
it's hard to tell people how to do things. You got to show them.
Right. But it's also hard to it's also hard to do that though when you're my colleague versus boss, right? Like if I'm your colleague, is it really for me to go to you and say, "Hey, smile more, be more energetic with a kid,"
No.
or is that
Relationship knows no hierarchy. Relationship knows no hierarchy. If you're an EA, an educational assistant, this is what we call them, and you go to a superintendent and you say, hey, can I take just a second of your time? I got to tell you, I am so happy to be in this division. You are running this show beautifully, and I just feel like we are changing lives of kids. Thanks for what you do. Equally as powerful is if that superintendent stops by school and says, hey, can I just step into this classroom? I heard about you. You're the EA. You've been in this division for 7 years. Buddy, you're changing lives. Thanks for what you do. Equally as powerful. Relationship knows no hierarchy. You don't tell your superiors how to do things. You
I
show them.
understand. You model it. You model it. You go down and you do it for them with the hope that it rubs off on them doing it for someone else.
Don't ever underestimate your power. My gosh, think about this in our communities. You show up. If somebody walked up to you at the soccer field and said, Brian, can I tell you something? Or the dance studio and said, I just want to tell you something. I saw your baby girl yesterday. She is the kindest little muffin I've ever seen. I just want to tell you, Dad, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
What happens to you?
Of
You
course.
want to make out with them. You're like, oh, what? Everybody wants to know they're showing up in some way that's contributing to this great old thing. And when you give that away, my God, exponentially, that is how we change communities. That is how we change schools. There needs to be nothing else other than that capacity to stay connected one-on-one. I can't replace that with a text. I can't replace that with an email, a Facebook emoji, none of those things. We are wired for human connection. My cortisol drops, my
Yeah.
oxytocin increases only when I'm face to face with another human being.
Yeah. And I think when you start thinking in that way, it's easier to come up with strategies of specific things to do. Like you mentioned, leaving a sticker on a kid's desk. One thing that I used to do is I would write a nice note home to a kid, right? Like I would say, "Dear Mrs. Such and Such, your kid has been amazing in class. I'm so proud of how he's behaved." And then I'd say he was amazing for like the whole last week. And I would hand it the kid on a Monday and I would say, "Listen, buddy, read this note. And when you think it's time for me to send this home, let me know." And like usually the kid would like read the note and be like, "Whoa, I can't wait." And so I get like a good 4 or 5 days of like good behavior just because he was like, "Mr. Mendler, it's time. I was awesome all week. Here, send this home to my mom." And they would be so excited to get that. And the level of good that got me, it was such a minimal investment for such a powerful thing.
Oh, I love that. And again, so much of this stuff we have at our ready and it's easy, it's free. We don't need to implement any specific program. It's like you make a phone call home to a dad that never has set foot in your school, that has never ever, like this kid's on an IPP, he's been suspended, he's been all of these things. You take 5 seconds out of your day and people say, I'm exhausted, I don't have that time. I get it. And so you do the best you can with what you got. But if you find that 20 seconds and you can connect with that dad and say, hey, you know what? Hey, Jim Bob, I don't know why his name is that, but let's pretend. Um, I just wanted to tell you, I got Kyle in my class. He's going to say, I know what. I just need to tell you, I think he's got the funniest sense of humor. Does he get that from you? I just feel so lucky to have him. So I hope you're having a good day. And then you do not use this as a teachable moment. You do not say, hey, and by the way, can you send him more than a wiener in his lunch? Or did you get this form signed? You say, I hope you're having a great day, and
And
you hang
that's
up.
it. Leave it.
You'll change the trajectory of a life, because what happens when that baby boy walks through that door that night? Where's Jim Bob? He's waiting for his boy. And what does he do? He gives
Of
him a light
course.
up. Gives him a light up. You have changed. Do you know how powerful you are as an educator? You change the trajectory of a life 20 seconds. You have the capacity to do that every single day.
Yeah.
This is why I will devote the rest of my life. I'm a psychologist. I'm not a teacher. I don't even understand how you do what you do every single day. My favorite part of my day is when I deliver my children to you. Okay?
Right.
What you do is holy every single day. You have the capacity to change the trajectory of a life. So I will spend time away from my own babies, travel this country, reminding you of how amazing you
I
are.
I went in yesterday to read, so I don't know if you might have seen my Instagram story
I
yesterday, but I
did,
post.
yes.
Do you see it, right? So I went in to read to my daughter's kindergarten class, right? So she goes to Montessori school, which is 3 grades in the same class. So she's the oldest this year, and I don't know when it's gonna be to where she's embarrassed by me, but she's not right now. She loves having me. It's like the greatest thing ever. She's so excited. And I went in and I had 3 books. So the kids are sitting in a circle, and I read Gerald and Piggy first, which is, really little kids book. And they were totally, totally into it. I mean, I was doing the voices and I was having so much fun, and like everybody fought. And then the second book was Pete the Cat. And during the second book, there were probably about a good solid half of them were paying attention. The other half were starting to look around, roll around a little. By the third book, I had about 5 kids paying attention. The other like 21 were just like, what is ever with this? And I was 14 minutes I was in there, and I looked at the teacher and I started like bowing to her, and I said, you're gonna do this for the I wouldn't know what to do next. Like, what do you do next? And she's like, I'm like, you got him for another 5 hours, right? It's truly remarkable what they do. And look, no disrespect to middle school and high school teachers, but
Oh,
what the little kid teachers do, they got them for this is what I sometimes I say to high school and middle school teachers, I'm like, no disrespect, but you can't handle a kid for 45 minutes. The elementary teachers got them for 5 hours, and you can't handle 45 minutes. You think they want to hear you cry about your 45 minutes when they got them for 5 hours? You got to be kidding me, right? Like, and they look at me like, oh shit, he's kind of right about this, like, come on, and on top of the 45 minutes, you're teaching the same subject usually all day, where they got to teach 4 different subjects often in a day. It
oh,
is And you said earlier the FUs. I was thinking the snot trails. Little kids, they hug you and then they leave snot on your stomach. Give me the FU over the snot on the stomach all day long. I'm not
All
kidding.
day long.
All day
Yeah.
long. I want to go back to what you said earlier, where you talked about starting 10 years in the mental part of a hospital. I want to hear more about that. So what got you to go there? And then what were some things you saw and what are some things that you learned from being there?
Great question. So I was inspired by a teacher in grade 10, actually, who I remember where Mrs. Holly Nordstrom was standing when she told us about neo-recession. So grade 10, we had a class of 22 in this rural community and a high school class of 22. And one of our kids were killed and the most popular kid in our class. And I remember where she was standing. I remember what she was wearing. I have no idea what she said, but I remember how she made us feel. And I remember thinking at that time, as long as the big people are in charge, the little people are going to be okay. And I decided in grade 10 that because of that teacher, I wanted to make people feel the way that she made us feel. And so I knew very clearly I was going to be a psychologist. I thought I wanted to do stuff in sports psych because I played hockey my whole life. And so that's where I started. And then I did a training year with our Canadian police organization called the RCMP. And I started to learn about trauma and how little we do for first responders on this planet. And I started really getting interested into that. And then they said, you need to do a rotation with kids. And I said, listen, I don't like kids. I'm not a fan of children. And they're like, well, you're kind of like one. We think you'd be a good fit. And I was like, touche. So then I fell in love and I realized we knew even less about kids and trauma than we know about adults and trauma. So I took this job back in Alberta. I was trying to find a husband actually because I was getting old and I didn't got one, and we're Catholic and Jesus dies at 33. And anyway, so I found a husband and I ended up on this locked psychiatric inpatient unit for kids. And I was like, wow, we are doing things even in this naive young psychologist way. I was like, why are we doing a behavioral approach with kids? It's based on what we learned from a rat. Right? Because in the 40s, my forefathers, Skinner, Watson, they were like, okay, how do we alter the behavior of children? Holy shit, we need to do something. I know, watch what happens when you shock a rat. Oh, it stops doing what you don't want it to do. And look what happens when we feed it colored water. It does more. Let's do that with children.
Yeah.
Done. So here I am, almost 100 years later, on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit, and the primary premise of treating kids was to take away something they loved when they didn't make a good choice, in the hope that they would go, son of a gun, I need to be kind. I've just taken away something you love, and my hope is they're going to be like, shit, I need to be better.
So they don't take it away again next time.
It's dumb.
Right.
It's dumb.
It happens all the time, though. It's exactly how they still do things in so many schools.
And here's what, it works when there's a relationship. And in the olden days, we had so much more capacity for connection and relationship because, Brian, think about the square footage of the house in which your grandfather was raised and the square footage of the house in which you raise your babies. What's the difference? It's significant, right? So yeah. Grandpa had so much more connection to your dad. He had so much more capacity to use a might is right behavioral intervention because they've spent so much more time physically connected to each other. They know how to regulate emotion better than we do. Now you can't just come in and take something away that a kid loves and hope that they're going to respect you for it, because there's no connection. So we have not, as we've evolved technologically and as our spaces have increased, we're confused now why you can't take away enough stuff from a kid to make them be kind. And so we started to alter this understanding of relationship and connection, what happens in the brain when I want a kid to listen, when I want a kid to learn. And it all comes down to connection, and then I teach. Yeah. So it's not like behavioral interventions and taking things away don't work. I have to have a relationship first, or it's actually harmful.
Take me through like some of the kids that you met, though, like working there, and some of the situations that you saw. What did you see?
Primarily what I see, and still to this day, is kids who are emotionally dysregulated, which means they lose their friggin' mind when things get tough. And the only thing we have to teach our kids, if you own a kid, teach a kid, love a kid, is emotional regulation. That means how not to lose your friggin' mind in times of distress. So when I ask a parent what they want for their child, they always say this to me: I want them to be happy. Cool. And they will also say three other things. I want them to, generally, I want them to do well in school. I want them to have good friends, and I want them to get back in this world somehow. You can't do any of those things if you're emotionally dysregulated. You will struggle in school if you lose your friggin' mind all the time. You will struggle with social relationships, friendship skills if you lose your friggin' mind all the time when things get tough. And you can't give back to this world because you're very egocentric. You're focused inside. You can't be kind or generous because you're losing your friggin' mind. And when you bring a baby home from the hospital, how do they let you know what they need? They cry. They lose their friggin' mind. They only got one skill to communicate. The only way we teach babies emotional regulation is we show them how to do it again and again and again. With your girls, you did this right out of the womb. Okay, okay. Shh, 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 shh. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We show them how to regulate emotion again and again. 0 to 2. They lose their friggin' minds every 30 seconds because that is their job. Our job as big people is to walk them home, teach them how to emotionally regulate. The more
But
I do that for a kid, they get those skills in school. If nobody's done that for a kid consistently, they're emotionally dysregulated. So most of the time when kids get really bad, they get oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, we start calling it ADHD or autism, which are very legitimate conditions, but often misdiagnosed as kids who are emotionally dysregulated. We start to lock them up and say, what's wrong with this kid? Nothing is wrong with this kid. What's wrong with this kid is there hasn't been enough people around their world to teach them how to regulate emotion.
what were some specifics that you saw there? Like, give me like a something that jumps out at you. Like, if I'm sitting there, like, what's something that you saw that, like, if I'm a regular teacher who teaches third grade on a daily basis, I don't necessarily see this, or this doesn't come to my classroom, but that you actually saw working in the hospital. Like, what specific things that had happened to a kid or
Uh,
kids?
oh my gosh, I like anything that you can imagine that would break your heart, times that by 100. So babies that have been in foster care, moved in the middle of the night, separated from their parents and their siblings, and then have significant anxiety, don't sleep. They even get psychotic, which means they hallucinate or they start to believe things that aren't true. Rarely would I see kids with significant psychiatric conditions, which is what we think we're supposed to be there to treat, right? Maybe I've seen one kid with pediatric bipolar in all of my 10 years, but we diagnose it all the time. I've seen early onset schizophrenia very rarely in my life, but oftentimes what we see is kids with severe trauma histories just trying to make sense of hard things, and they can't
Yeah.
do it alone, but they have nobody in their corner. And so often who they would identify as anybody who's ever had them is a teacher, a coach, an EA, a bus driver, a custodian, somebody who they spent more waking hours a day with than their primary caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really so much about how do we get family support group involved. I would love to go to schools every time that these kids are struggling significantly to try to garner some empathy. This babe is going to have to get emotionally dysregulated 1,000 times before they believe that you can walk them home. And so,
So what does that mean? So what would that look like if I'm a teacher? If you say that to me, if I'm sitting there and you come to me and you're like, this kid's going to get emotionally dysregulated multiple times, what exactly do I look for?
okay,
What is the behavior that will then show me that that kid is emotionally dysregulated?
losing their mind. So
Be
your
specific, like calling me names, like flipping over a desk, like literally any of those behaviors, you would
yeah.
classify that
So
as
when you
emotionally
think about,
dysregulated.
right, think about a temper tantrum. Emotional dysregulation. A Caillou is emotionally dysregulated when they're losing their friggin' mind. A Flat Stanley is emotionally dysregulated when he's like, fuck you, I'm out of here, you son of a bitch, right? That's emotional dysregulation, right?
Gotcha.
When I have a kid who's able to use their words, usually when you're most dysregulated, you lose your words, right? Have you ever had a kid grunt or eh, and you
Frequently.
say, hey, buddy, look at me. Eh.
I have an 8-year-old who does it every morning
Exactly. So
in
she's
my
she's
house.
regulated. Right. I mean, and that's their job. Their job is to lose their mind. Dan Siegel, who is one of the foremost psychiatrists in this process, talks about it as flipping your lid. So if you think about it as your prefrontal cortex, when it's on, you have access to every strategy you've ever taught your baby girl. When she is kind and she can use her words, she's regulated. When she flips her lid, her neocortex, her prefrontal cortex goes up. She's all limbic system. All she has is fight, flight, or freeze. So
Yep.
she's going to say things like, "I hate you. Get out."
Yep.
And our only job is to get them regulated. I can't
Right.
tell a kid how to calm down. I got to show her. So you can say all the time, "You're not making a good choice. Calm down." It's not going to work. What works is when you say, "Okay, okay, look at me." And it is so hard to do that when we're flipped. Because guess what? When you lose your friggin' mind as a dad or a teacher, all you have on board is fight, flight, and freeze.
But look
You
at me, what? So what? So if I'm the teacher and I say, hey, like you're flipping your lid, like you're the kid, you're flipping your lid. I'm the teacher, and I'm saying, and now I sort of get you to look at me, and I say, hey, what do I exactly say next? Because what you right, because what I say next is what matters most, right? What I say next either adds gasoline onto the dysregulation, right? It makes it worse, or it adds water to it, which calms it down. So if I'm the adult in that situation, what approach do you recommend, or what specifics do you recommend that I say in that moment that a kid's flipping their lid?
Absolutely. Three things that'll be really helpful that I want, I hope this is helpful for your listeners. Eye contact is sometimes the most difficult thing to do. And people say culturally, you have to be careful about that. Listen, if I lose the eyes of a kid, I know they're dysregulated. Okay. And so
And
it's not like
you'll
going
say
like,
that any culture, you believe eye contact is important in any, because I think eye contact is very important as well. But so you think it transcends culture for the
there
most
is
part?
no culture on this planet that doesn't make eye contact a socially referenced, not one. And there's specific rules around when and how you can do that. Certain cultures, they say, struggle with eye cultures or with eye contact. We're really surrounded by a lot of First Nations community up here in Alberta, and they come generally from multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma. And so what happens is, where's your eyes when you're significantly abused? Where's
Down,
your eyes when you've come from trauma? Down.
down.
And so I still socially reference, and with all due respect, I want to notice where your eyes are and get them slowly but surely. Okay.
Understood.
So
So
that
that's
becomes,
first.
that's really critical. When a kid loses their language, you need to lose yours. So when they have no capacity to articulate, excessive amount of telling them what to do is not going to work. Think about the last time you were just so mad that you couldn't go like, it's somebody in your face saying, use your words. What is your problem? Does not allow you to articulate, because I do not have the capacity. I've lost my Broca's and my Wernicke's area, my prefrontal cortex in that moment. So I can't process language. If I can't produce it, I can't process it. So I want you to stay physically present, but you do this. Okay. Mm-hmm. 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 And as soon as they can swear at you, you're back in business, right? Because as soon as they can say anything, get out, you can say. So here's the other thing that works significantly is getting them to take a drink of water or eat something. And this flies in the face of all behavioral reason, because if they've just told you to fuck off and flip the table, the last thing you feel like doing is saying, let me get you a drink of water. Come here. Right?
Totally.
But I am not rewarding that behavior. I need to keep this kid regulated to keep him safe and everybody else in this school safe.
But it
So
makes sense because like so often I feel like anyway in general the opposite is what works best. And it's true with my own kid, right? It's I've heard you talk about this, that it's way easier working with other people's kids than it is your own, because when you work with your own, you have your own skin in the game, and really the things you don't like in your kid are the things you don't like in yourself. And you see that you've passed them on to your kid and that really annoys you, right? Versus it was amazing, like when I coached T-ball, the way I would handle my own son was completely different than how I handled the other kids. And it got to the point where the assistant coach and I made a pact that he would coach my kid and I would coach his, and neither one of us would coach our own, which is a hard thing to do. It's really hard to do because you're sitting there and you're right there and you're in it and you want what's best for your kids so bad. But often the way that I would deliver it to my kid is different than I would deliver it to someone else. Like I would never get in your kid's face and be like, get over here. We don't talk to people that way. Right. Like if I saw your kid being inappropriate in a place, I might pull your kid aside and be like, hey buddy, come here. Hey, what's your name? Like my name's Mr. Brian. Like I saw you upset over there. Like, is everything okay? Like what's going on with you? Is there anything I can help you with? Like I would take, literally that's the approach. Yet I often find myself taking the other approach with it's we often take out our biggest annoyances, our biggest anxieties, and our biggest frustrations on the people we actually love and care about the most, which is really sad. It's
well, and
I
if
don't
you
know
think
why
about
we
that
do.
as an educator, you get so invested in the kids you teach every day. I
Yeah,
mean, I hear many of you call them your children, or like,
yeah,
you would say, these are my kids. These are my kids. So when they start being disrespectful, we start to take that, and it gives us less capacity, right? This is why in August or September, you are so much more capable to handle those things. People say this to me, kids are done in May and June. Maybe, but educators are so like at that point losing their minds quite a bit, right?
Yeah,
Kids are barometers of how we respond, and it is so much easier to do it when there's less skin in the game. So
yeah,
you're right, you will handle my babies way better and I will handle yours. And it's just like when you step into a classroom, some teacher's losing their mind and you come across the hall and you're like, you know what, I got it, just give me a second, because you're like, okay,
yeah,
we have so much more capacity because you're amazing when your lid is on. You're an
totally.
amazing father, you're an amazing educator, right? When your lid is flipped, man, you should own kids. And this is true for me. Like there are some days with my own personal children that I'm like, holy shit, like I can't believe I wrote a book on this. Like if anybody could see me
Totally.
right now, they'd be like, you're such a fraud. Because there's one capacity to know what to do and then one capacity to stay connected and be present, which is my whole take on this thing, is that the kids are the least of our problems. If
Yeah.
those of us holding them are okay, these babies are going to be just fine.
I agree. I agree. I agree. And look, I talk about this frequently that in my opinion, and I talk about openly being in addiction recovery, and I talk about the number one thing learned in there is every time I have a problem with someone or something, I am a big part of the cause of that problem. And if I change me, I will change everything around me. And it's such a powerful way to live life because I feel like our society, everybody blames everybody else. And when you can just look internally for the answer, right? Not for the problem. Like I don't tell teachers look in the mirror for the problem. I say look in the mirror because you're the solution. You are the solution to the problems that you're having. You have inside of you to solve. And what happens in education is we often look externally, right? We look at tickets and stickers and consequences and punishments as the fix, right? Let's give the kid more stuff, or we'll give a kid a sheet with that's supposed to keep track of behaviors. The point is, whatever the thing is, it's usually external driven versus internal driven, which is it's very rare that a team of teachers sits around a table to discuss a kid and they all start with each one thing that each of them could do differently next time, right? Usually the discussion is about how do we get the kid to change? How do we get the kid to be more respectful? And I always say the way to get the kid to change is to change yourself. Look at your own actions on a daily basis. How do you talk to kids? What is the tone that you use? What eye contact do you make? And really dissect that within yourself. But that's a hard thing to do. Like for me personally, it took being pushed to do that. Like I needed recovery rooms to say, look in the mirror. Like I, on my own merit, was not a person who was just going to look in the mirror on a daily basis because I think it's uncomfortable to look in the mirror.
Well, here's the thing, and it's also not an end game. Some days you're going to crush it, and other days you're going to be shitty at it. Like balance is bullshit. Like you're going to get to there some days and be amazing, and other days you're not going to be. How do we keep each other in the game on the days that we're great, that we're like, I got you, come here. And then there's going to be other days where you're like, you know what, everybody needs a pizza today because we got hard stuff. These babies are going through hard things and they've just cut our resources in half, right? All we got is each other. We're doing holy work here, team. Let's get it. Let's do it, right? So I don't think it's an end game for anybody, and that's the point. We talk this stuff. I mean, obviously you know a lot about this stuff, and I have a friggin' PhD in this stuff, and there are many days that I forget it, right? Many days that I forget it, and so how do we build this culture where we stay in this place? Jimmy Cassis talks a lot about this, right? In Culturize, how do we do this? George, again, I know you just had George Couros on, this idea of relationship and connection and walking each other through this process, that, man, that's where the answers lie. We got the curriculum, literacy and numeracy. I mean, people get mad at me about this, but literacy and numeracy, gee, I mean, our kids are going to school in North America. They can be all right. What we're
Well,
not doing okay at is how we walk each other through this, how we remind each other, holy shit, like, look what you're doing for these kids. Thank you for your service.
yes.
Thank you for showing up and staying late and
Right.
buying stuff at Walmart
Right.
on your own dime. My God, you're a hero, right?
Right.
That's the thing for me. If you only knew, like Brian, if you only knew how many kids think about you, if you only knew how many kids, if you get the top 3 kids in your head who you'll never forget right now, if you can, and they'll come in your head like this, I know it, they think about you 10 times as much. And when I say that to teachers, right, what you do is holy. And I just, from the bottom of my heart, want you to keep that on the hardest days close to you, because you would do this job for free, and basically many of you do, but you would do this job for free if you knew just how much you have changed the lives of children. And if you've been in this business for more than 5 minutes, my God, the line is huge. Like, and most of them, the ones who you change the most, will never have the capacity to say thank you, right? They'll never. And that's my job for the rest of my life, is to remind you
Yeah.
and everybody else who does this work that this is all we need is you. All we need
Yeah.
is you.
And it's hard as a teacher because teaching is so not an immediate gratification profession.
Oh,
It's like the opposite of that. And what's interesting is I know both now because, you do these presentations. And by the way, speaking of Jimmy, I did a conference with him in Hawaii just last week. So it was good to see him. I was
awesome.
the opening keynote. He was the closing keynote. So we spent the whole day together, went out to dinner together. It was a whole big thing. And what's interesting about him and about a lot of the other people we talk about is it's all the same thing, right? It's all connection. Like Jimmy's a master connector. Jimmy's the best and I said this to him when I had him on here. I said, you're the best person that I've ever met at building relationships with adults. Like, you're unbelievable. I mean, you remember everybody's name and you remember their family members, and you make every person in a room feel like they're a special person. And when you have the ability to do that, you become popular. It's just how it works. Like, it's how it works. People are attracted to you and they want to be around you. And that's what's so great about these lessons that we're talking about, is that they're life lessons. They're life lessons. They're lessons for really every single aspect of life, which I love. And that's why I love having you guys on, because that's what people bring on, is they bring on these lessons that if you can get to this point, if you can learn how to smile when you're upset, and just put on, like, and occasionally just walk in and just like look at people and be like, what's up? It's good to see you. And really, like, fake it sometimes. If you don't feel it in that moment, fake it. Understand that the good will come from that.
Well, and I think one of the things around faking it is it gets a bit exhausting to do that. Here's the quickest way that I always get back into a genuine place of like, okay, I'm doing holy work. And it's kind of becoming cliche these days, but it's gratitude.
Yeah.
People talk a lot about this as a practice. And for a long time, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to, 3 things I'm thankful for. The quickest way in any given moment is to come up with the 3 things, right now. And you cannot use easy things. You cannot say my children, my spouse, my car, my house. Think for me in this moment, if you're driving in your car or whatever you're doing, give me the top 3 things today that you're thankful for. And I say this to people who've lost kids. I say this to people who are stage 4. I say this to people who unimaginable tragedy has happened. When you can find gratitude in those moments, right? It grounds you. Your prefrontal cortex comes back on, and then you are much better able to serve. And when we try to fake it for too long, that's where we see anxiety and depression and all of those crazy things. I got to be okay here before I can give it away.
Yes. 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 And any last thing, like, these hours fly. I don't know if you realize we've already been going an hour, which it goes
What?
quick, doesn't it? I know, right? Almost an
You're so amazing.
hour.
I could do this forever. We got to do this again.
I know, it's fun, isn't it? When are you going to start a podcast?
This year. It's a
Are
plan.
you? Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's the way to go. It's I tell people it's my favorite thing that I do. I love it. I love it so much. And I just love the number one thing I love about just the world we live in today is, like, nobody can deny you from things anymore, right? It's like, you don't, you can like you did, or like I did with my national best-selling book, That One Kid. I self-published that. Like, I took that to publishers and they didn't want it. And I was like, yeah, okay, cool. You don't want it. And I self-published it, and like literally hundreds of thousands of copies later, I'm so glad that I self-published it, because I'm like, nobody's getting a nickel from this thing right now. And except me, and I can keep the price low. I can charge like a really good price for teachers. And the podcast was the same when I was, I actually told George's story. When I was out of college, I always actually wanted to be a radio show host. That was my goal in life. That was always what I wanted to be. And when I first got out of college, I applied for radio jobs and I got denied. There were no radio jobs out there. It was like, if you were a radio personality on a show, you never gave that up. And now what technology has done is they've given us all the ability to have a voice. And if people want to hear your voice, they'll find it. They will find your voice if they want to hear it. And and no one can deny that. And I'm sitting in my basement, like I'm in the basement of my house, right? And it's like I can do it from here by pushing a button. And this is the world that we live in. So I love it. I love that it's possible to do this kind of stuff now.
Well, and I love this because as we step into this hard and holy work, you got to be careful about who you surround yourself with. And I often say this, you sit with the winners, the conversation is different. And when I get to sit with a George or a Jimmy or a Brian Mendler, I get to talk about things where like we're going to make significant differences in the world. And misery loves miserable company. So pay close attention to who you're sitting with, because there's no excuse. As you say, I can find a podcast that's going to make me get back in the game. Even when I'm exhausted and overwhelmed, I can find a book, Kids These Days, that one kid, any of those ones, they're there. And we'd love you to have them. We're doing this. I do this, not ever for anything else other than I believe to the core of me that what we're doing is holy work and that we can change the trajectory of a life.
Yeah. I'm with you. Thank you so much. Listen, so we have a segment that I do at the very end. It's called Mendler U. So I have you probably don't know about this, but I'll tell you about it and everyone else. We have a paid subscription service on my website. It's brianmendler.com, and you can click on the link that says Mendler U, and it's $5 a month. And for $5 a month, you get unlimited access to now over about 80 videos. I do bonus segments of every guest, and I read a question. So I get a ton of questions on Instagram, on Twitter, from teachers about challenging students. And I got one literally last night from a person who I was reading the question, and I wrote her back and I said, I have Jody Carrington on tomorrow. And I said, I am going to read this question to Jody Carrington because I think this would be a good one for her to read. So
Bring it. Let's go.
You good with that? You want to do it? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read the question on here, and I'm just trying to find it. I moved, it's so Instagram does not make it easy to like find things. You know what I mean?
I'm getting ready.
All right, here we go. So she says, just found your podcast. I've been binge listening more than half the episodes. I'm an elementary grade 3 to 5 special ed teacher, works with a lot of behaviors, most identified as emotionally disturbed or with autism. I pride myself on working with the challenging students. I love the interactions I have, blah, blah, blah. My difficulty is with some of the other teachers in my school. Since I like behaviors and tend to be good at working with these students, I get bombarded with general ed teachers asking for help with some of their general ed students who are more difficult. What I sometimes struggle with is giving them that constructive feedback they need to hear. For instance, sometimes it's their classroom management, too much downtime, not enough structure. How do you get them to truly look in the mirror without being offended? Thanks for everything. So we kind of touched on that a little bit during the show, but I think that'll be an interesting one to do. You want to do that one with me?
Sure.
All right, cool. So we're going to wrap this up. All right. So listen, I want to just say thank you to you for everything. You're amazing. Her book, one more time, plug it. Kids These
Days.
Kids These Days. And it makes so much sense. I got to tell you, as a person who's been around the book game for a little while now, finding a home run title is really hard to do. And it's the key. The key to a great book is having a great title. I'm telling you that is the key. Like, you can have great content in a book, but if you don't have a great title, your book's not going to do well. And that is a fantastic title for so many reasons. It's just, you can look at that as Kids These Days like are amazing. Oh, Kids These Days are so annoying, right? Like, there's so many different ways to use that title in a sentence or to look at things. And it's an interesting thing. And it makes you say, I want to open that and see what she has to say about Kids These Days. So congratulations on that. Congratulations on your success. It was really fun. I appreciate you so much, and I'll talk with you soon. Sound good?
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome job. Yep. Okay. Now I'm going to pause this, and then I'm going to hit record again, and we're just going to start, and we'll talk about that question.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, right? So I don't love this program that I use is good, but it's not my favorite thing in the world.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Mendler U. I am with Jody Carrington, author of Kids These Days, and an amazing person to talk to about challenging students. I read the question on our regular show. I'll read it one more time, just a quick version of it so everybody on here can hear. The question is, just found your podcast. I'm an elementary grade 3 to 5 special ed teacher. I don't think that's going to matter as much. I think the answers that we're going to give to this question are going to apply to everybody. Both students, she teaches students that are emotionally disturbed and some autism. Basically what she's saying is my difficulty is with some of the other teachers in my school. Since I like behaviors and I tend to be good at working with them, I often get bombarded with general ed teachers asking for help with some of their general ed students who are more difficult. What I sometimes struggle with is giving them that constructive feedback they need to hear. For instance, sometimes it's their classroom management, too much downtime. How do you get them to truly look in the mirror without being offended? Thanks for everything. So I just want to start by saying what I think is really good about that question and that she's answering it. And I think the benefit here is that based on the question she wrote, other teachers are interested in getting better. And I like that at least. Like at least they're coming to you saying, what are you doing that's helping? Because for me, I felt like often when I was teaching, there were kids I was successful with that they would leave my class and go to another teacher's class and they would be a disaster in that class. And I wanted so bad to go down there and talk to them and say, but they didn't come to me. They didn't say, hey, Brian, what are you doing that's working really well with that kid that you might be able to help me with? That never happened. And so it was always really hard for me to figure out, do I go do it even if someone didn't ask? So at least here they're asking, which look, what I would say back, and do you want to hit this first or you want me to keep going?
Go ahead. You got
Okay.
it.
So what I would say back right away to that person is I would say, I appreciate you asking. I appreciate you asking. And I think it's amazing that you want to get better. And what I say to people all the time, because this happens, right? This happens where I get put in a room at a school that I go to and the principal puts me with a teacher or two and they say, you're struggling, fourth period, you're going up, and the teacher wants no part of it sometimes, right? And what I'll say to them though, occasionally is I'll say, look, if I needed to learn how to teach 7th grade social studies, I would sit through the next 25 to 30 minutes with you because it's what you do and you do it really well at a really high level. And so this is all I do. And I want you to also know that some of the answers that I might give you, you might not love. I want to make that clear too ahead of time. Like if you're asking me for your help, my goal is to help. It's not to make everybody feel good all the time. And so the discussion we might have might be a little difficult sometimes. Are you okay with that? And I would start with that, like making that known ahead of time so that I could, during the conversation, ease into, have you looked at your classroom management thought process? Have you looked at how you talk to kids? Are you talking to them privately or are you talking to them publicly? Are you yelling, hey, pick that piece of paper up right now, young man? Or are you pulling them aside and getting there and saying, hey, buddy, I know you didn't drop that piece of paper, but I would appreciate if you picked it up so much. Thank you so much for picking it up. I really appreciate it. Anyway, like which one are you doing? Do you find yourself being more public or more private, right? And so then I think once you kind of lay it out there, that's what the conversation is going to be, then it becomes much easier to get into the details of what specifically they need to change. Does that make sense?
100%. So this is often what I say to kids, right? Or when we're talking about how we get through to kids, because listen, our colleagues are just big kids. You know how to do this with kids, and we often tend to not do this. So Gordon Neufeld talks a lot about this. The hardest thing we'll ever do is collect before we direct. Stephen Covey says this: seek first to understand before being understood. I love that they're coming to you. That is amazing. It tells me you're a leader in this school. It tells me that you're doing something right and people are watching. I love that. I want to know why. I want to make sure we hold space before we start to fix. Because what you'll get if you don't understand why is this: yes, but. If I ever hear somebody say this to me, yes, but, I tried that. And then in my head, I'm thinking, well, why the hell are you coming to me anyway? If you don't want what I have to say, then, but exactly what you said is so true. I want to hold some space. I want to figure out why first, and then I'm going to provide a suggestion. Then and only then will they take it. And so tell me, these are the 3 words that are going to save your life. Tell me more. So when they come to you and they say, listen, I want to do better. I noticed you do this. I'm really struggling with this kid. Even if you have 64,000 fixes in your head, even if you know their classroom management is shit and they need to be doing, like, it's so obvious. You could give them a list of 20 things. Hold up, my friend. Here's your superpower. You say this: tell me more. What are we worried about the most? What are you trying already? And then you teach. Collect before you direct. Collect before you direct. Again, this will work with your husband, your wife. Honest to God, this is a superpower. You seek first to understand before being understood, particularly when the fix is so obvious. You will get there, my friends. Just slow it down.
Did you see or hear? Have you heard of or seen the Dope Educator on Instagram? So
Uh-huh.
David Jameson, right? So I had him on here. He's the one who did the handshakes with all the kids. He's got like
Yeah.
totally went viral. He was on the Today Show. He was on Good
Yeah.
Morning America. He was all over the place. And so I had him on as a guest. And one of the things that he said, so I love what usually happens from each guest is like one thing will really stick with me for a long time, right? Like Joe Sanfilippo said, one of the favorite things he said was, he said, if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to tell your story, and you might not like the story they tell, right? And so, and so that's really stuck with me. And the Dope Educator, the line he used that I love was he kept saying, you got to catch the fish before you can clean the fish. You know, you got to always catch the fish before you can clean the fish. And a lot of them, they're trying to clean the fish, but they haven't caught the fish yet. And it was like such a great analogy where I'm like, right, you got to catch the fish. Like you haven't caught the fish. And once you catch the fish, you can clean it, you can skin it, you can do whatever you got to do to it, but you haven't caught it yet. And once you catch it, then you got it. And I feel like that's the case. And another thing that I spend a lot of time with educators during my seminar that I do is there's uncomfortable moments. Like part of my job as a staff developer is to make you uncomfortable. And I believe that's a good thing because, and what I say to them is I say, I'm going to make you uncomfortable today. I want you to know that. And when I make you uncomfortable, embrace the discomfort, because discomfort's an appetizer for growth. You cannot grow in this world without feeling discomfort first. It's true both physically and emotionally. And in life, when we get uncomfortable, we want to hide from it. We want to run from it. We want to put up walls around it. And I look at them in the staff development today and I say, but not today and not while you're with me. Today, while you're with me, I'm going to ask you to embrace the discomfort. I'm saying that because I think that's a decent thing to say to that teacher, right? If I'm trying to help a colleague and I might have to get a little uncomfortable, acknowledge it, like talk about it. It's there, you feel it. Discomfort's one of those things that's like an elephant in the room often. Like you can feel it, you can cut a knife through it, but people don't address it. And I feel like when you address it, it becomes such an easier thing for people to go through, because while they're going through it, they're constantly reminded it's temporary. It's like working out, it's temporary. It's painful right now. Trust me, a half hour from now, you're going to be glad you did it. Like, trust me, that's what you're going through right now during this. And letting them know that ahead of time can be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so much of that, building that piece into it is also like, there's always a reason why people are coming to you, right? And so I want to figure that out. And oftentimes we just jump to the fix. Especially if we get dysregulated or we think they're questioning our capacity, because I love how these teachers are coming to her. Many people don't. Many people come in much harsher, much more critical, right? Like, what the hell are you doing giving kids a snack after they flipped a table? Like, are you going to create a milieu here where everybody thinks they're going to get a snack? What? Slowing that down becomes so much harder.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more.
Right.
What are you seeing?
Right.
What? That is so hard. And people will say, oh my God, like, listen, if it was easy, we'd be having great cultures. We wouldn't have any conversation about school culture. I mean, that's where we're going everywhere. In anything I see written these days is really about how do we increase this connection of teams? Because the more disconnected we become, we don't even need to be in the staff room. We can just email each other or text each other, right?
True.
And we're losing the capacity to just refuel each other back to, hey, I noticed what you did. So how do we build that back in? And when they come to you, they might come in hot and know that that's all the shit they got on their shoulders. And I'm so grateful that they're coming to you. Breathe.
Yeah.
Say, tell me more.
It's one of the, I got to tell you, it's one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is that time. It's like I get this hour, 45 minutes to an hour block of time with a person, and we just get to talk, and like no one's distracted. No one's got their phone. No one's getting called. No one has to run out for something else. And I feel like the minute this is done, there's going to be like 50 other things that need to get done throughout the day. And I feel like it's a sanctuary where I can come in, I could just tune out everything. And I feel like it's so rare in my life today. I feel like in my life today, if I don't do it like this, I don't do it. I mean, it's true. Like I wake up to my phone and I go to bed to my phone, and it is next to me. It is with me. If I don't have it on me, I start panicking and wondering where it is. It has become a full blown drug in my life. And look, it's on one hand, it's the greatest thing ever, right? It's made me not have to step foot in a bank in the last, 10 years. And I don't have to write these things called checks anymore, because I can press one button and use a thing called Venmo, and the money ends up in your account. Like, this is the world we've created, but at the same time, with good always comes bad, right? And it's about managing that in life. But
Yeah,
man, nobody ever said it was easy.
Yeah, technology is not the problem. It's how we use it that matters. And the more disconnected we become, the less we get good at having small talk. The more we get our groceries delivered and we don't take our babies to the grocery store, yelling at your kid in a grocery store parking lot is a rite of passage, right? You're in a parking lot. Get over here. What? My babies don't see me be kind to other people in our community, and I can't tell them how to be a good citizen. I got to show them. And the more disconnected we become, it is a conscious choice to step into those things. It's a conscious choice to say, everybody in the staff room, let's go. Right?
Yeah.
I know it would be easier to eat in your classroom. I know you're exhausted and overwhelmed. Some of the best motivators in my life they don't have motivation, they have discipline. And they're really disciplined about meditating, about practicing gratitude, and about staying connected to the people they love the most.
Right.
I feel way more confident writing a book in my room by myself than I do parenting our 3 children. Because most days, I feel like a shitty parent.
Yeah.
So it is easy to disconnect and do something that makes me feel better because I want to be where I'm competent.
Yeah.
What is so critically important is staying connected to human beings. And it is such a hard thing for most people that the more disconnected we become, the harder it is to stay healthy.
Patience too, like that's another thing. I mean, I look at like patience. My children, my personal children. I mean, we order Grubhub and Uber Eats. Like at our house, we order between those two. Literally, we don't go out to eat anymore. I mean, so they don't have to learn how to sit in a booth and wait patiently for their food to come. I mean, the way it works here is they could be watching TV or reading a book or doing whatever they want, and the food is brought to them. They don't even have to go to it anymore, right? I mean, that's the world Amazon has created, where you could press a button and the toothpaste shows up at your door. It's an unbelievable world, but that's the negative. Is it's like there's so many skills that we learn that I think kids learn, but I think it's every generation it changes. You talked about grandfather's generation and how they lived, often sick. My parents, my mother grew up with her brother and parents in like a 2-bedroom house, and little tiny house, New York City apartment, actually, for a long time. And that's where they grew up. And it was a tiny little place, and they did fine. Like they did just fine, but then you kind of graduate to where I grew up, which was a small house, but it was a house. Like we all had our own room. It's like where I look at where my kids live now, and I'm like, it's ridiculous. My kids this summer, we had a debate one day which pool they should go to. We have a pool at our house, which we just moved into a new house, and it had a pool. And then we're members at a health club that has a pool, and then there's another pool. Like there's 3 different. I'm like, this is ridiculous. You guys have 3 pools to choose from.
And you deserve it. We work hard. It is not about beating ourselves up for, I think, getting great things. What matters is our capacity to be conscious in that regard, right? I mean, we just came back from a Disney cruise. I work my ass off. I am very proud to be a CEO of a company, to be a woman who's written a bestseller. I am not, you cannot dim my light in that regard, but I need to be so conscious of how I stay connected to other human beings, how I stay humble and kind.
Totally.
Because
How was Disney? How was it, by the way? How was the cruise?
But Disney knows how to do it. Do you want to talk about a good corporation? If you want to understand how to run a business,
of course.
They highly, they have so much staff. They're engaged. They're all very good at eye contact. They're all very good at staying connected, knowing your name, all the things that you want to feel. And in light of everybody melting down, because of course our kids lost their minds like every 30 seconds, we made the most incredible memories.
That's great, because I'm on record as not a huge Disney fan, which is I agree with you though. By the way, they are unbelievable at how they run their business, and they're phenomenal. I just don't like crowds, and like for me, anytime I get, and it's a Brian thing. It's my severe ADHD. It's my constant need to go and move, and when I have to stand in line for a long period of time, I start to just get anxious, and I got to work on myself. I know I do, but I found that to happen there a lot, when I was, it's just a lot of standing around.
Yeah, because you get all the characters and you get all this lovely stuff, and the babies are really enjoying it. I mean, there's a kids club, so you can drop your kids off,
Yep.
which was delightful.
Yep.
And they loved it. And
Yep.
and then you stop at an island and you
the
get
best.
to come out and sit in the beach. But like, I think you'd love it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Cool. Listen, thanks, Jody. It was awesome talking to you. Great fun. I appreciate you. Appreciate everything you're doing. Hopefully our paths will cross in person one day,
I would love it. I would love it. I hope
too.
so.
Good to see you. I'll see you on social media.
Take care. Yeah, you too.
Thank you.